Caroline, thank you so much for your time today. I'm excited to hear more about your background as well as everything you're doing at Admiralty Partners. I want to set the stage before we dive too deeply into it. Obviously, you were an athlete before you became an investor. How
hmm
much do you think that kind of shapes how you see investing today and how you operate in the business of sports?
Yeah, I mean, I think being an athlete has honestly shaped sort of all facets of my life. I feel like you talk to any athlete that's played at a competitive level and that totally shapes how they see the world. I think the biggest lessons for me, candidly, are just like you have to learn how to fail and fail gracefully, which is like not a lesson that anyone really wants to learn, especially in investing. Um, you have to learn sort of like how to pick yourself up and be resilient, how to work. I mean, I played a team sport. I played college soccer at Harvard. And so have being a sort of a team athlete, I think also really teaches you how to rely on other people and that the world is a really sort of interconnected space and that you don't always have to go at it alone and being willing to ask for help and pick yourself up when you fail and realize like what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. I think all of that sort of encapsulates into sort of how I see the world more broadly, and then definitely in terms of investing and work overall.
Yeah, and what was that transition like for you? Obviously, most athletes struggle, going from being an athlete for 20 plus years to trying to
Yeah.
figure out what you're going to do with the rest of your life. So how was that process for you? Did you have a game plan for life after sports?
Yeah, I mean, I think look, I have to be very honest about where I sit in the athlete realm compared to sort of professional athletes, and I can imagine that's an even harder transition. I think for me, candidly, I knew I was never gonna go pro or do anything beyond that. And like a whole conversation for another time is obviously the state of women's soccer at that time. Like didn't really
Yeah.
exist to the level it does now, and there wasn't really a lot of money in there. But anyways, I actually was candidly very ready for break, and maybe that's like sacrilegious to say as an athlete, but I'd given so much time and energy into something. I'm just ready to pivot. But when you spend, as you said, like at that point 20 plus years doing one thing, it's hard to give it up. And I think that's exactly why I wanted to work in the sports industry is I felt like in a small way I could really, having played a sport for as long, like would help me understand what the industry is at large. And so I wanted to, as I said, sort of get into that industry. And so after I graduated, I went to work at ESPN in New York, and I worked in a group called their sports management division, which is called something different now. But basically, we worked in between um, uh, sort of sponsors and production to help create and sell different sort of added value sponsorship opportunities across their sports platforms. So again, like ESPN, we're talking like 2011, 2012, the early like heydays of ESPN. I was like, this is incredible. I absolutely love it. Everyone here is a sports fan. So it really helped ease that transition. Um, and I knew sort of long term, my goal was always to kind of get where I am now and work for our family office. And we can kind of get to that in a bit. But the genesis of our family office wasn't rooted in sports. So my goal all along was how do I really earn my stripes and really like build into sort of a basis for learning and experience in the industry before I felt like I could transition into sort of a more investing role.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, and I feel like now I'm kind of going into more of a background, but um, I spent a number of years at ESPN, helped them, create all these added value sponsorships across all their professional sports portfolio. I managed all the sales efforts around the 2014 World Cup in Brazil. And
Wow.
again, like you can sort of say as a few years out of college graduate, getting paid to go to Brazil for a month to manage well over hundred millions of dollars in assets. I was like, I've peaked, I've done, like this is the coolest thing ever. It was amazing, really incredible experience, but I sort of saw the writing on the wall and the industry was shifting really rapidly and traditional media was changing. And so I left New York to move to San Francisco to take a job at YouTube and their sports team. And that's actually what brought me out here. So I worked at YouTube and their sports group for nearly 8 years, basically working with teams, leagues, and athletes and helping them build their business on YouTube. I also launched our athlete business there, and I think that's actually where the athlete sort of circle came. My athlete story kind of came full circle as I was now working with all these professional athletes across a wide range of sports, helping them to build their brand and media presence on YouTube. And I really felt like I could speak the language and translate better. And this might feel very simple and silly, but I can't tell you how many times we'd be working on things and, someone would be like, "Hey, I don't know why they didn't post this video over this time." I'm like, "Well, they lost yesterday. Like, what athlete is going to want to like
Right.
post or do something? Or, by the way, they're like traveling today, or all this stuff is like, it feels really simple. But I think being able to translate between, a lot of the key players in the industry and more the business side has allowed me to kind of find my niche and build really interesting relationships across the sector. And so, as I kind of alluded to, after my son was born in February of 24, and that's when I kind of figured that was a really good moment to decide to finally join our family office. And so for the last 2 years, I've been investing in the sports industry, and that's kind of, I guess, sort of my long journey of how I figured out how to stay really connected to a sport and industry that I love, but find a new way to do it beyond just sort of playing on the field.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's helpful context. And as you mentioned, you said the family office wasn't initially rooted in investing in sports. Was there like a
Right.
specific moment or like do you remember when that shift started to happen and when you started to see sports as being an investable, alternative asset class?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, like I think it never wasn't an investable asset class. It just didn't have the eyeballs on it. And I think the biggest reason why not, if we're looking at sort of like where that sort of sector was, when I was graduating college to where it is today, is honestly the professionalism of the assets within the industry. So not to say in any way that like teams or leagues weren't managed incredibly professionally, right? Like we're coming off the Super Bowl, like it's clear the power of the NFL, it's clear the power of the NBA. Like these are huge leagues and that drive a lot of awareness, but I think each individual team was run as a generational asset or was run as a more of a vanity investment versus a true business where you have a bottom line and you have people like really focus on what the dollars and cents are. And I think that that has shifted dramatically. And now it's become obviously a very hot industry and a very sexy industry. And, if you can invest in a professional sports franchise versus, a random fund, I can see why a lot of more people are trying to get into this space. And to kind of speak to the aerospace defense side of it, that's kind of where the sort of our family office was built. My dad built it. That was his background. He was in the Navy. He served. He, again, similar to me, like what was his passion? What did he know a lot about? What was his deep level of expertise? And where could he bring a differentiated approach? And that was aerospace defense. That was not my passion. It's not my expertise. And we had a lot of conversations as a family as to kind of generational planning and what does that mean that we have sort of two separate interests. And that's kind of where, in order for me to sort of join and have credibility to build an additional vertical separate from sort of the genesis of our family office, required me to have like a real background in the space. I think it'd be very different for me to come out of college and say, "Hey, I know what I'm doing," versus saying, "Hey, now 15 years later, like I've worked in like I've touched every element of the industry from an actual like job perspective. And now as an investor, it really gives me a unique perspective into the space versus someone who's maybe come up through finance or something else that is now trying to look at the industry from an investment standpoint."
For sure. How would you explain your thesis around sports? Like what was that like forming kind of a mandate and what opportunities you all were looking to invest in when you kind of opened up
Yeah.
this branch?
I think the like incredible luxury and very candidly privilege we have as a family office that uses its own capital is we have the ability to be pretty fluid in what our investment thesis is. We're not a fund, we're not accountable to LPs or other investors. It's really sort of us as a unit making decisions as to kind of what we see the value is. There's obviously a ton of capital flowing into the sport, whether it is a fund or family office or whatever else, but the majority of the money does seem to be coming from funds or sort of institutional dollars. And I think for us, there's sort of two parts to it. Like as I alluded to, I take sort of great responsibility of the fact that like this is a family business and each dollar that we're investing has been like very like blood, sweat, and tears have gone into each dollar earned. And so I take like a lot of responsibility into anything we're investing in. I have to have like extreme conviction in it. Like we haven't raised money and it's not someone else's money. Not to say that that's like there's anything wrong with funds. It's just sort of a different mindset that I'm really focused on like taking a lot of care with all the money that we invest. And we don't need to have a hyper specific thesis, because we can kind of be really focused as to, um, where do we see really good value? And I think for us, the biggest thing is that anything we invest in has to be a real business. Like we're very focused on the fundamentals. As I said, I've spent, a lot of time in the sports industry, so I know how to be a value add investor. And so I'm not going to be sort of focused on like, ooh, this is really hot now or this is really trendy. It's more, where do I really feel in the underlying conviction of that opportunity? Who are the people we want to get in bed with? It's big decisions to figure out who those right operating partners are, um, and kind of make decisions on a case by case basis. And I think if you kind of look at our portfolio to date, we have been pretty diversified. There isn't really a single through line, and I kind of like it that way. I like that I kind of can be, you know, an opportunistic investor. So if someone's saying, "Hey, I have this really cool thing I think you could bring value," great, let's move on it versus saying, "Well, we only do this or we only do this." And I think that's a sort of privilege and luxury we have as being a family office.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Are there any like specific subsectors of sports that you think are undervalued or slept on, whether that's like women's sports or obviously we're hearing a lot about AI within the sports landscape and how it's reshaping personalization and fan engagement. Like,
Totally.
is there anything like that's piquing your interest over other areas?
Like candidly, yes and no, because I think as you said, like AI is super buzzworthy and super trendy. So in many ways, that scares me a little bit. Not that it isn't an incredible smart place to put an investment in, but everyone's looking at AI right now. I mean, women's sports to me is always going to be not only a passion point, but I think a very strong sector that is going to continue to need investment. I know we see a lot now of like everyone's getting into the space, but like the overall dollars are much less than what's being invested into men's sports. So I'm always going to see that as an opportunity. I think the biggest thing again is just being really strict with your fundamentals and where the value is and where you can create value within those different opportunities. So yes, always very bullish on women's sports, and I do think each dollar added into that area is going to just create immense value. And I think a part of it too is, I'm kind of speaking both sides of my mouth because I'm talking about like strong business fundamentals, but I also think there is a little bit of a, obligation we have to continue to invest in women's sports. And just like at some point, they have not had the opportunities or dollars that men's sports have. And yes, it is hard to kind of look at the money being lost in those areas right now, but I think that's the same way was men's sports was however long ago. So how do we continue to push that area forward and continue to be sort of loyal to the quality of the product on the field? And these women are incredible athletes, and there's great opportunities to be had.
Hmm. What do you specifically look for in a founder that's pitching to you? Are there any like overarching qualities? I mean, obviously there are certain things that you want every founder to have, but like it's just like a bucket, like a list or a criteria that you specifically have for like evaluating founders and companies within the sports industry.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the biggest thing is being realistic. I think that maybe comes from like, my dad being in the military, but like I was sort of raised to just to speak straight about something. Like if you only think that something is going to earn X in year one, don't tell me it's going to earn Y. Like let's just like be very frank about what the underlying business model is when we're kind of doing that underwriting exercise. Um, so someone who can, be really upfront and really honest and have frank conversations. And candidly, I think the other part is just humility, is understanding like what you're really good at and like why you're in that position as a founder and what you really bring to the table, but also be hyper aware of what you're not good at and where you need help. And look for those people that can really help you and guide you along that journey versus saying, you know what, this is my company. I've done other things elsewhere. And like, this is what we're really focused on. So I don't need other help. So I think it is a bit of like some of those sort of intangibles in addition to just kind of like finding the right person. Sometimes first time founders are actually incredibly great to invest in because they've never done this before. They really want to prove themselves. There's a lot more riding on the line. But I think some people also look at first-time founders and say, wait, you've never done this before. Like this feels like a little scary to invest in. So I think it's kind of, I evaluate a lot of this on a case-by-case basis, depending on kind of what the other factors are at play and candidly to, what else we have invested in. If we've done a couple, maybe earlier stage investments, maybe we want to balance that out with some things that, are a little bit more later stage.
Hmm. What advice would you give to an athlete that's looking to get into investing? I'm personally super bullish on athletes being fitting back into the sports ecosystem from an investment standpoint. One, because they can bring capital, but also influence and
Mhm.
strategic value from a number of different ways. So, if an athlete was listening to this, wanted to get into investing, what would you tell them about how to navigate the ecosystem?
I completely agree. I think the biggest thing I tell an athlete is like, A, do it, but be smart about it and realize how much value you bring to the table beyond just the check you're writing. But also from like just a brand perspective, like who are the people that you want to be in bed with, right? Like I think the interesting thing about it being an athlete is you've like spent your whole career in a certain sport. You've probably built up a reputation and built up a brand, whether it's like how you've, produced on the field, on the court, whatever, but also like what are the things you spent time doing outside of that, that anything that you invest in, if you were going to put your name on it and be public about it, probably should ladder up into, you know, how you see your brand and what you want to be doing long term. So if you want to be known as someone who like is a tech investor, like learn everything you can around that and like invest in that space. If you want to be in media, if you want to be a team owner, whatever those things are, like find your sector and apply that knowledge. Realize that you have a lot of value to bring to the things you're investing in and be really smart about like what that exchange of value is because I do see a ton of things being pitched to me that are like, look at our, our LP base, it's this athlete, it's this athlete, it's this athlete. And I'm like, well, I've never seen any of those athletes do anything related to that. So in that case, that brand is like fully leveraging that athlete base to drive incremental investment. Like maybe that's what the athlete wants, but on the other hand, like what value are you getting out of that? So I think it's just being smart around how you're looking at the deal, what the deal is. Talk to the right people about making sure you get the good deal structure you're looking for. But yes, I 100% think that athletes could bring a ton to the table. Having lived and breathed, especially if you're looking at sort of team investment or league investment, like they know what other athletes want. And I think often one thing sort of like owners in that space can forget is that like so much of what they own is based on it's a community asset. It's not only based on, what the actual business is generating, but also like who the athletes are that play for them. Like those are people with families and what that looks like. And like the fans that give up money and time and energy and heart to follow that team. And I think those are two really, really important things that need to be taken into account to sort of any investment. And I think athletes can bring a really special perspective. And I don't want this to come across as sort of like a generalization or critique, but I feel like, often there can be a sense of like, well, I've only played this sport. I don't really know what to do on an investment side. But I think would know much more than you think you do because, as we talked about in the beginning, around like hard work and putting time in and dedication and like understanding what it takes to run a business and what it takes to be involved in a franchise and be part of that. So I think that just having confidence in your conviction, but also making sure that you have the right financial advice for whatever that investment looks like.
Yeah, I love that. Really good points. And you mentioned earlier, as a family office, obviously you don't have any LPs to report to. So when you think about
Mhm.
success, being a sports investor, what does that mean? What does that look like for you?
It's a great question. I mean, I think one thing that's interesting about the industry overall right now is we're seeing a ton of headlines, as we've talked about this stuff around this investment's happening here, this person bought this, but we haven't really seen any exits. Like we're still in like sort of, to use a sport, like we're still in like the first innings of like where this is going. We've seen some, minority positions, or obviously with the Lakers that being sold, but that those assets are sort of a different era,
Yeah,
right? Like that had been owned for, for single family for a very, very long time, but this new sort of professionalization and ownership is still really early days. So it'll be really interesting to see what that looks like. I think for me, success obviously is like, are we generating good returns? Like that's,
yeah,
baseline. But at the end of the day, like I do, you know, for better or for worse, I keep an investment journal of like, hey, these were the things I was thinking about when I made this investment. And so so that as things happen, I don't have that like current bias as to, oh, well, I'm gonna like back justify why I did this. Like these are the reasons I did this and like stay true to those and learn from those. So if I made an investment because I thought this was going to blow up, or I really believed in this founder, or I thought that there was a new opportunity, and all those things turned out not to be true, like that's okay. Or if those things turned out to be true, great. Like, what do I learn from that investment to take to the next one? I think it's just really important to have a very clear mind as to, why you are investing in each thing. And being willing to, take the wins and take the losses and be humble throughout the process.
for sure, for sure. I appreciate that. Last couple of questions before we wrap
Yeah.
up. With all that being said, if you look 10 years ahead, what do you think is going to change the most about sports as an asset class if you had like one big, broad prediction on the space?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is seeing like how the sports ecosystem is evolving and how each different thing is impacting each other part of the ecosystem. So you alluded to AI, right? For example, like that is the like hot new thing as everyone's talking about justifiably, but like how does the introduction of AI into sort of team management change what it means to manage a team? How does the introduction of AI change what it means to decide like who the players are on the court or on the field from like a performance standpoint? How does AI impact the ability to, um, like look at performance training and like injury prevention? And so I think for us, we really try to take a diversified approach to the ecosystem because it's really hard to know how changes in each part of it, whether it's, teams and leagues, media, tech, real estate, as those grow and evolve, what outsized impact that has on other parts of the industry. I would say like 5 years ago, no one was really talking about real estate as being a huge part of the sports ecosystem, and now it is. And now it's becoming a big part of like stadium ownership and what does that look like and how does that impact things and um, people looking to buy teams that own their own stadium and the cost of building stadiums. So I think it's having a really smart sort of diversified approach. I really hope that like the biggest thing 10 years from now is women's sports continues to almost be on par with men's. I mean, maybe 10 years isn't the right timeline, but I fundamentally believe in the power of the incredible women athletes and their ability to drive eyeballs and the people that love watching them. And so nothing would make me happier than, we're seeing just huge numbers and honestly huge sort of rights deals, payments for these athletes, opportunities for them that are closing the gap with men's sports.
Caroline, this has been amazing. I really
Thank you.
appreciate your time. Where can people learn more about you and everything that you all are doing at Admiralty Partners?
Yeah, please. I would love to connect with anyone who's interested. LinkedIn, excuse me, is always an easy one, or our website. And yes, I think the sports industry is small and it's important to build really, good connections and relationships with people. So anyone who wants to talk, whether it's a true sort of investment opportunity or an advice or whatever, I mean, I'm grateful to be here because of the mentors and people that gave me time before me. So if anyone also is just like, hey, I'm interested in this sector, I'd love to pick your brain, more than happy to have those conversations as well.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Malcolm, for the time. I really appreciate it. This. It was really nice speaking with you.
All right.